Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I'm your co-host, JP John Poz for the Two Man Power Trip. Of course, joining me is my co-host himself, the financial wrestling genius, Mr. Lavie Margolin. Lavie, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, John. A special opportunity today. I recently picked up this wonderful graphic novel, which I was aware of for the last few months, called Victory Parade. Our guest today is Leela Corman. I'm just going to give a brief bio. Leela is a painter, comics maker, and educator. She's the creator of numerous works of autobiographical and fictional comics, including, of course, Victory Parade, You Are Not a Guest. I'm going to mess this one up, so Leela will help us out. Unterzakhn, and We All Wish for Deadly Force, which is an amazing name and actually a great name of like a wrestling promotion one day. Victory Parade is an NPR, Washington Post, Guardian, and PW Best Book of the Year. The author of the Eisner-nominated graphic novel now gives us a heartwarming, I'm going to mess up this word, phantasmagorical tale of love, loss, and trauma, both personal and global, set during World War II in Brooklyn and in the newly liberated Buchenwald concentration camp. So an amazing opportunity, but you may be thinking, okay, this is pro wrestling. So what's this all about? Ruth Arensberg's desperate attempt to exorcise the nightmare of growing up in pre-war Nazi Germany takes her into the world of professional women wrestlers with devastating consequences. So, Leela, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I do want to say it's actually heart-wrenching, I believe, not heartwarming.
Oh, yes, certainly, certainly.
An important correction because while I wish to warm people's hearts in real life, I do not wish to do that in my work. I wish to
Yes,
break them.
thank you.
Nice, nice. When you look at pro wrestling, because obviously we're talking about the business of wrestling here, but when did you first discover pro wrestling? What were you a fan of? What kind of drew you into the wrestling business?
I'm just going to turn my camera on because it feels weird to not be on. So, hi. So, interestingly, just a quick aside, the painting behind me is actually a portrait in progress of Josie Reisman, author of Ringmaster. I don't know if you guys have read Ringmaster. I assume you have because it's like a
Vince.
great wrestling book.
Yeah, yeah, about Vince.
And I forgot that was behind me until I just turned my camera on. Uh, you know, Wrestling became a part of this book for reasons other than interest in the art form itself. Um, but like a lot of children and grandchildren of immigrants, my grandmother was really into wrestling. This is like a thing. I don't know what it is with grandmas and wrestling. I've
Yes.
talked to a lot of people about this, but my Yiddish grandmother in the 80s really liked watching pro wrestling. And I guess, I'm not super up on wrestling history. Would that have been WWF at that point, like mid 80s,
Hmm.
Reagan era? She really loved Hulk Hogan because of his anti-communist kayfabe, I guess.
Yes. Yes.
Because she was from Poland originally and had lived under Soviet occupation after the war. And I think any kind of anti-communist yelling was made her happy. Uh, but the way that it came into my work as an artist was in 2015 when John Darnielle of the Mountain Goats asked me to illustrate the album Beat the Champ, which is I'm sure you guys also have heard that record. It's a wrestling themed album, really wrestling as a metaphor for a lot of other things like childbirth and childhood trauma and all kinds of things. What I learned when I was illustrating that was how much I love drawing wrestlers. And it reminded me, I have a background originally in martial arts and then in dance. So I spent a lot of decades of my life until fairly recently, like getting thrown around or throwing myself around. and I love drawing sweaty bodies in motion, partially because of that. And then when I started working on Victory Parade a few years later, um, I thought about something that I read, not about wrestling, but about boxing. And I cannot remember where I read it, but it was something about how people who go into boxing are generally people who grew up being hit a lot as kids and being beat up a lot as kids. And I thought, it wasn't a cerebral intellectual process. It seemed immediately obvious to me that the character of Ruth would be a wrestler as a way of coping with surviving something that is actually happening at the same time as we're reading the book. So the thing that she escaped is still happening and devouring people that she loves back home. Something that I think a lot of people didn't catch in the book also is that Ruth, while she grows up in Germany, is actually not German. She's from Poland. Her family immigrated from Poland, which is a chapter before World War II that I find really interesting. Als student in Berlin, but it's sort of deliberately buried a little bit in the book. You know it if you know it, but it wouldn't be immediately obvious.
Now, as far as like a process of developing the character, what was the process like of actually, creating the character and putting this all together?
So similar to all of my fictional work, which this is, the character kind of arrives half formed already and tells me who they are. And then I have to catch up with a lot of research. So I spent a lot of time chasing down pre-war women's wrestling material, which there wasn't that much of that I could find. I
Right.
found a really oddball, interesting memoir that somebody had written, which I apologize, I don't have it in front of me, so I don't remember the title, but I can dig it up for you. It was written by somebody who had been on some kind of, I think, either Southern or Midwestern, it's been a while since I read this book, amateur wrestling circuit, a woman. And that gave me a lot of material. And then I also learned a lot from watching the documentary Lipstick and Dynamite. Have you guys seen that?
Yep.
Great film with an awesome Nico Case soundtrack. And even though that really starts in the 1950s, it was a good place to learn a few things. I'm sort of circling around what's going to become very obvious in a minute here. But the third thing that I found in that research were some clips on YouTube, really precious clips of women wrestlers on YouTube. Sorry, there's probably some notification making noise on my computer. And so I was able to see a little bit of the movement vocabulary and the hair and the clothes. I will say, the movement vocabulary that they're doing in the book, in the wrestling, is I started to realize about halfway through drawing it, I'm really just kind of drawing like my own martial arts movement memory here, more so than professional wrestling. The thing I'm circling around also is Jaime Hernandez, who's like, he's a living deity to me as a cartoonist. I did not intend to do this interview in a Love and Rockets t-shirt. It just happened to be the thing at the top of the drawer. But I would not say that his wrestling comics have been as big an influence on me as everything else he's drawn. Having said that, the wrestling comics that are embedded in the storytelling, so not so much Whoa Nelly or Queen of the Ring, as much as I love those, but Queen of the Ring is just amazing in general. But the stories about Maggie and her aunt and Queen Rena did definitely, they're certainly in my DNA as a storyteller and in the DNA of this book. There is a direct homage also to a Jaime wrestling scene. It's actually the death of Ruth. Am I spoiling anything?
I hope not.
To your listeners, the book's been out since April, so
Yeah, it can't be a spoiler.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah. When you look at it, though, like, why wrestling? Why does the character like? Is it something deeper than just being about wrestling?
Sure. I think having been a person who was for a long time very into, actually still kind of am, into very intense physical training of different kinds, it's a really good place to leave your demons for a while, for a variety of reasons. It made sense to me that this character would have a death wish also. And ultimately she gets her wish in this book. In the Jaime homage scene. The scene that I'm paying homage to is actually, no one dies in that scene. It's actually kind of vaudevillian and funny, but Why wrestling? Exactly that.
Now I'm going to turn it over to Lavie, who's got a lot of questions for you as well.
Yes. So I just recently shifted the camera setup this week, unfortunately, but way behind me is a poster presentation from YIVO on a book by a Yiddishist called Bad Rabbi.
Oh yeah.
And one of the pieces of research, what he did was, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the book, but
Oh yeah.
he went into, of course, the basically the New York Posts of the day that were written in Yiddish, the dailies, and sort of found salacious, interesting stories related to Jewish characters. One of them, of course, is Martin the Blimp Levy.
I love the blimp.
So that's fascinating, and I think there's just one video, but at least one video on YouTube where it was just amazing to go back and look at it. So just a little bit more about your background, because as I mentioned in the email, this also crosses over in terms of my Jewish roots and so on. My great-grandparents came to the U.S. from Minsk and Pinsk, which was funny because it rhymes. Everyone always laughs after I say the Pinsk
so many
part.
Jewish jokes.
Yes, yes, exactly. But where is your family from originally?
I'll answer that in 1 second, but I just want to say on the topic of Bad Rabbi, Eddie's my people. We're friends. We've been friends since we did an event together at the Elder Street Synagogue in 2007 or something. Friendly online, and so after I read Bad Rabbi, I read that in one sitting on a flight home from Denmark a couple of years ago, and I actually ended up doing a couple of one-pager comics kind of from some of that material with Eddie, including one about the blimp.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I have to say, I'm sorry, this is a bit of a digression, but are you guys familiar with the movie The Forbidden Zone?
Just by name.
I don't think so.
Okay. Best movie ever made. Made in the early 1980s by Richard Elfman, starring most of his family, from what I can tell, including all of Oingo Boingo, Danny Elfman as the devil. There's a character who's a famous Jewish wrestler, and I can't remember the character's name, but he's so clearly based on the blimp. If not, it's a coincidence. But I'm going to send you a clip of that wrestler character after we finish this talk. So my family are Galicianers on my mother's side. Well, yeah, my mom's side. The side who survived the war and came here in the 1950s came from, my grandfather's from a small town called Grybów in southeastern Poland, not far from Novi Sad, and from what's now, I think, the Slovak border. And my grandmother was from a town called Sambor that's now in Ukraine. But at the time it was Austria-Hungary and Galicia. And I now have started spending time in Grybów and getting to know people there and doing work with them too. So that's been really lovely.
Very interesting. So one of the things, circling back to what you were talking about in the beginning from your grandmother, is sort of the Hulk Hogan representing, the American ideal of the 1980s.
Which at this point,
going against these supervillains, usually, foreigners and certainly communists. And somebody like Nikolai Volkov came to America to escape the war from Croatia, very anti-communist, and then he played in his career, a communist, and before turning after the fall of the Berlin Wall, of course. But that all goes back to your main character from the book, who was a German Jew, or from that area, and then had to play a German, not explicitly a Nazi German, right, like a lady wrestler, but a German, but then was booed, of course, for being German. That interplay, trying to succeed, but then sort of being pulled back, sort of for something you're trying to escape.
Yeah. I mean, I think American society really flattens identity. We don't have a great, we're not known for having nuanced views of people in this country, So I think that, at the time, I don't think there would have been a way for a person like Ruth to protest and say, but I'm not even the thing you think I am, by multiple levels of remove, right? Degrees of separation. She's just being pushed around by men who have more power than she does, and by ugly public opinion. In a way, I think also, when I started working on this book, the really ugly rhetoric against immigrants had just started to ramp up again in this country. And there was the language about giving asylum and refuge to immigrants from Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan was starting to sound exactly like the rhetoric against letting Jews into the country in the 1930s, to the point there's a New York Times, I think, press clip from the 1930s. I think it's the Times. I had it saved for a while. I'm not sure if I still do. Basically saying exactly the same thing that was being said in the 20-teens. Just substitute Jews and for Iraqis and Syrians and ISIS instead of Nazis. Well, if we let the Jews in, then Nazis will infiltrate with them. So I was going on the assumption that there would have been people in the audience who would just flatten her into that category.
Yeah, and even in a very different way, John and I, in last week's podcast, we were reflecting on going to WWE's show at Madison Square Garden, whereas, the champion is German. He has no known, association with anything untoward, although, like, his group's ring name years ago was Ring Kampf, which I always found, kind of weird. But yeah. He comes out, like his arm behind the back and very, stern face, big blonde or whatever. It's sort of like, are they or aren't they? So, John, just to be there, it's a little bit awkward. Not associating the person, but just sort of that vision for it. But in terms of writing a book, of course, that has very strong themes in terms of the Holocaust. I'm just reflecting back. Everyone always thinks about the seminal work, Maus. I remember looking at that maybe in 6th or 7th grade, and kind of I feel like back then in the 80s, especially if you were Jewish, you were just being exposed to all of these images, whether it was black and white film, Holocaust museums and things that were just too much to absorb. So your graphic novel is very graphic, which is, very important for the work. So as you imagine showing it to an audience, who is your intended audience? I've even heard college students talking about I don't believe the Holocaust happened. So what's is this sort of partly to tell the story as we're always told to do?
So I want to start by saying that I didn't grow up like a lot of other Jewish Americans did, in the sense that I did not go to Hebrew school. So I was not exposed to the Holocaust in an institutional way. My understanding of a lot of the Hebrew school education that a lot of my friends got was kind of re-traumatizing, it sounds like, and also indoctrination, a way of making sure that everybody toes the same line politically, and that the Holocaust is the underpinning of that. I didn't grow up that way. I grew up with survivors. They raised me. My grandparents lived in Lincoln Towers next to Lincoln Center, and we lived up in the low hundreds on West End Avenue. And so they were my main caretakers after school and all the time. All their siblings and in-laws had also survived. So no one ever sat me down and said, hey, we're all Holocaust survivors, or hey, they are. It was in me by osmosis. And it lived in our family in a silent, huge way. I also was raised really differently from a lot of the rest of my family, because a lot of my extended family were much more conservative, and my parents had been sort of hippies. They were kind of post-counterculture boomers at that point in the 80s. And I was like a teenage New York punk, looking for alternative culture and finding it because I was in New York City. I had access to it. So when Mouse came out, I was a teenager and I was working in a bookstore. Might not have been when it came out. It might have already been out for a while and I just hadn't known about it, but it might have been when it won the Pulitzer. I'm not sure. But I found Mouse at the same time that I found Raw comics. And Raw is the thing that really just dropped into my life like a bomb and detonated. And I found Love and Rockets soon after. So to me, Mouse was just part of a coalescence of art comics coming into my life and happening in the culture of comics making. When I first read it, I remember just feeling like it just kind of landed with me very organically, because I came from a family like that. Their way of surviving, they didn't survive camps for the most part, although a few of them did. But my grandparents and a lot of other people in the family and others with them survived in a hole in the ground in the woods. So like, I knew that. I didn't know a lot of the details. I'm still learning some of the details. But Vladek was like my grandfather, like the members only jacket, the cap, the attitude, the stubbornness, the difficult personality. Like I recognized all of that. I read it again when I was in art school and I just appreciated it a lot as storytelling. And then I taught it in 2020. And when I taught it, that was a really interesting way to approach it. Now I went and I reread it as a teacher and as a professional comics writer and artist. And there are a couple of things that happened there that were interesting. First of all, I really understood on that pass through it how incredibly well written it is. The other thing I understood, because I was teaching it to people who were not from the same background as me, a really diverse range of students. I was teaching it at University of Florida, so the students were all Floridian, but they were from different backgrounds. There was Middle Eastern, South Asian, Southern white kids, and none of them were Polish Jews. What I saw in Mouse on that pass was also what a granular description of Polish Jewish life before the war is in that book. Which, because that's my family too, I didn't think it had to be explained, but I had to explain it because none of them understood that. So that was really interesting. But I think for a lot of us, and maybe this is true for you too, Mouse was like somebody finally telling us some of the stuff that our own families didn't want to talk about.
It was interesting as like my history teacher actually was a Holocaust survivor. Like it's more of like a baby, so she didn't have that like, reflection on that. But it was always like prevalent, and I would have like nightmares about like Nazis coming to get me, and like the type of things that we learn like in terms of child development, like you take it slow. This is how you expose it to it now. Like
I never learned that.
Yeah, like children's books might be like reflecting on a flower, like something that was like, very peripherally to like introduce the concept and whatever. But while you were talking, I wanted to just give another book recommendation, a very different type of like perhaps like grandparent to grandchild relationship, but an interesting one, especially growing up on the Upper West Side. My Captain America by the granddaughter of sorry, why am I blanking? Joe Simon. So this is Megan Margulies. It kind of sounds like my last name, but not. So her reflection on like growing up on the Upper West Side, like visiting her grandfather as an artist and so on. So that was really interesting. But from the Pro Wrestling Press, I know that there was a great Slam Wrestling book review by a friend of ours that was done. But have you gotten any other feedback from like the pro wrestling side of things?
No, only that, which was a really lovely surprise. Unless I will count Josie Reisman as from the pro wrestling side in some ways, having been so deeply immersed in it, writing this book and after. But Josie's my buddy who lives up the street. So.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And like I said, like comrade and currently artist model. No, actually, I would be curious to know if it's been read by any other wrestling people. But I also sort of am a little bit nervous because it's like not really. I don't think I really got wrestling right in the book.
I think like for those that are like very like like sort of like comic book guy like but about like wrestling, we're more like, and maybe we'll count ourselves broadly among them. We're more like critical of like the creativity like of the week to week shows rather than like a good faith attempt. In like fiction or media, like if the boots are wrong, whatever, it's sort of like that's okay. But if you like have the wrong storyline or whatever, like on television, that's where people lose it. So a last question for me before I turn it over to John, and this is more like of a personally beneficial question. So my daughter is now in an art high school in Manhattan. We're very proud of her, not only for taking the bus to and fro, but of her talents. But whenever people talk about like an art career, right, the first thing they say is, well, you can't get this. It's so hard to get that. As a very successful industry practitioner, award winner, and also an educator yourself, what advice can I share with her, or I will share this portion of the audio with her, as she explores her own career?
This is a really good question, and I want to preface this by saying a little caveat, which is that I know the world is very different. The world that your daughter is going to enter, and congratulations, by the way, that's great. The world that she's going to enter is going to be different than the one I entered as a professional. So I don't know exactly what all the challenges she's going to face are, but I think some of them I can speak to. So I have a friend who's been a touring musician for over 3 decades, and we once joked that if we were going to teach how to do what we do professionally, like how to put yourself out there, we would call the class Stubborn Bastard 101. You have to really want it, because if you don't, it's not going to be rewarding. For me personally, and this may or may not be the case for your daughter, I can't really imagine anything else I could even be capable of doing. I mean, within that range, there's a lot of stuff that I do. I'm really grateful that I have the ability to teach, because it's really rewarding artistically and also supports me and my family, which is great. But it took me a long time to get there. I think having a certain amount of inner defiance is really important. And I say that, I think that might be less true if we were living in a different country, but we live in a country that hates cultural production and hates artists, does not support artists, especially women artists, artists with kids, but really all artists. So we don't have the kind of cultural support that people get in other parts of the world, like any European country, Australia, a lot of other places. So there's a lot you have to learn how to do on your own here, but there's a lot of support out there for you too. Beyond that, I would say technical skills, getting really polished at whatever art making you like to do. And this is not like a have the best chops kind of thing, but just get good. Like train really hard. The same is true for anything that you want to do, right? I also think any career is hard. It's not. The reason why people think being an artist is so hard is partially because there's so much bias against artists in this country that people don't understand what it entails and can't understand how we make a living and how we function. But it is hard to be an artist in capitalism. And so I think developing a really good critique of that is also helpful, and having friends and support systems around you that understand that as well.
Thank you so much, John.
Now, where could everybody get the book, follow you on social media? Where can everybody follow you?
The place that I'm most active on is on Instagram. And I'm on Blue Sky also, but I'm more there as a reader than I am as a poster. Just my first and last name, all lowercase, on Instagram. Super easy to find.
Thank you, Leela, for all the time today. Really appreciate it. Everybody should check out your work. Great stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great talking to you. Happy New Year.
Yep, you too. All right, Lavie, let's talk about the news. I need you to go over something with me, something very important, and that is a TV landscape?
Yeah, what isn't it supposed to be quiet coming out of the new year? And suddenly we have like the pro wrestling ecosystem, like especially the outside of the biggest, although they're having their plan changes too. Like so much going on. So firstly, like AAA, I know that like it seems to have a lower profile in the US television landscape. Certainly now it will, but it's just not talked about as much. But it might have been, we don't know, but it might have been the third most watched wrestling program in the US when it was on Unimas, which just ended, meaning that, maybe, I guess, fourth most, right? Like Raw, SmackDown, Dynamite, and then maybe depending on the week for AEW. It was a bad week for AEW because we never got any AAA ratings. But Unimas as a station averaged 342,000 people in prime time. And then it was also replayed on Tudin, TUDN, which averaged, again, as a station, we didn't have any ratings for AAA, 85,000. So its parent company, Televisa Univision, is cutting back on sports and that sort of programming. So AAA got cut from there. So it was there for maybe 6 months. Who knows, right? Like no one was even watching that closely or was reporting through the pro wrestling press, but that's a loss. And then New Japan on Access TV ended suddenly as well. It felt sudden that The Observer and PW Insider had different takes on it about the same time. New Japan has exited Access TV. The broadcast agreement between the two entities officially expired at midnight on December 31st. Now, Meltzer said that New Japan said that they're the ones that left. It was their decision. The latest contract was up. New Japan ultimately decided against renewing its deal with Access. Additionally, Meltzer stated that New Japan wanted to negotiate to get their programming on a better station. I'm trying to avoid saying like good luck with that, but I do have an idea later in the segment. So a representative for Access TV shared the following: "We will not be airing New Japan for the foreseeable future. Our agreement expired at the end of 2024. We do not comment on the state of current or future agreements." So Access TV, again, we didn't get New Japan ratings in a while. When we were getting them, they were about 45 to 50,000 at a low. Before Nielsen, I think Meltzer, and this could be totally off, had said that it was there were reports from Access TV's tracking that it was about 200,000. Like, what was it, 10 years ago that they premiered in Access TV? So it was sort of a different world there and a different buzz. It was really a game changer. New Japan being on Access TV, and then working with Ring of Honor. But when they returned under Anthem being the owner, and being under TNA, like it was always, the second tier to them. And it seemed like at certain points that even TNA was like doubling their rating. So to me, it didn't make much sense to pay New Japan for rights fee when, if you want that hour to have wrestling, adding another hour of TNA or even some TNA classics might have matched that number or exceeded it if it was new content. While I was on the rhythm of pro wrestling airing in the US, I was like, now that we know about AAA status, does CMLL still air here? And people are like, it aired here? So they had two deals as of a couple of years ago. One was LA TV, which is like a Diginet station, which covers about 32% of the US with 49 affiliates. And then they were on Nuevo Vista USA. I might be messing up the name, which had a number of affiliates as well. As far as I can tell, they're not airing anymore. So look, like the international landscape of pro wrestling, maybe, with the first two certainly, but the third may have been gone a while. But look, that's all gone away at the moment. Now, in something that just broke as we're recording this, a small thing but an interesting thing, TNA is now airing Impact on the New England Sports Network national feed. So there's always a lot of confusion about this. In New England, I'm not sure if any rights have changed or whatever, but like this was the station, right? The Sox, the Bruins, the Celtics, and so on. Then you would watch like regional NESN. Obviously, a very powerful platform, at least at one time. Now, the national feed is sort of like on a higher tier cable stations for the most part. Like if you're really a big fan of these sports, it's not going to be airing on your basic cable, but if you want to pay more money. So obviously something like that has shrunk. So in terms of being reported on the website that the national feed for NESN airs in 5 million homes. That includes Dish TV, so there might be like a crossover right with access. Anyway, OVW though airs on the regional NESN. They were airing on both, so I don't know if like TNA now airing has changed things. But it's an interesting approach. Like it's a pretty low profile station, but Access TV, is losing viewers too, just with the natural churn of the world of pro wrestling. The world of cable TV and streaming and so on. So I'm wondering if if TNA can't get more exposure through bigger deals, and they did sign a good one recently in Canada, that maybe they will do like a little bit of a hodgepodge of syndication. I think it would be smart for them to reach out to Dave Marquez to see if he can help distribute them as he does his own Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, or maybe even pay to take over those time slots. I'm not sure if that's more advantageous than just buying like one paid programming or something somewhere else, but it's an interesting door that they're opening with this type of distribution now. Of course, TNA back in the day did have some modest syndication with their Explosion show. Staying along the TV line, so we'll go a little bit back and forth here. So TV Line had a report of the most watched CW shows so far this year in terms of series. So NASCAR Xfinity, which was just two races, was 1.01 million viewers. Superman and Lois, which is ending, it's in its last season, 767,000 viewer average, and NXT 753,000. So basically there. So obviously, clearly a very strong part of a weak network. As we look at the landscape, right, we would hear of Ring of Honor, maybe they'd be on True TV, but True TV did want pro wrestling, but they went for a safer alternative and a replay. AEW Dynamite will air on True TV now, so they don't have to deal with a whole, with building up branding for Ring of Honor and Unknown. It's more of like a solid replay. What else is going on? Just looking at the rest of the market, right? We had seen Freddie Prinze Jr. say that he wanted to get a deal for a number of years. We haven't seen that. We just talked about ROH. TNA, obviously, if they were close with another U.S. broadcaster, maybe they wouldn't be pursuing something like New England Sports Network right now, or securing something like that. So I think that is indicative a little bit. MLW, the station being averaged about 2,000 to 4,000 viewers. We don't know MLW ratings, although they were about that when last was reported. WOW is doing well, or at least has a track record to continue syndication. They're in year 3 now. And then there's a hodgepodge of, like sort of building up syndication through station by station, market by market. Those with that sort of view have Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, OVW, Rocky Mountain Pro, and ROW, of course, stronger in Texas, although that kind of shifts around depending, but they have a number of markets as well. Now, when we think about like stations for airing pro wrestling, like obviously Fox always comes up. Then there's the Hispanic channels, which obviously it's not as easy to do as it seems. Showtime would sort of make sense, although pro wrestling has never been there, maybe not since, maybe I think WWF might have aired house shows when it first started, but I'm not sure if I'm adding that to house shows I know had aired on HBO, or maybe conflating the two. But the one that makes the most sense to me, John, right now is Vice. They're rebranding as sports programming. Obviously, a heavy amount of that is Dark Side of the Ring. So you think, okay, are they just going to like focus on, these documentaries? But they just signed a deal with the Arena Football. Arena Football 1. John, I don't know if you followed this drama, but I was really enjoying following it the last couple of years. Arena Football sort of collapsed. It restarted and collapsed. And then out of those ashes, the like a number of home markets are like they keep their own trademarks and branding and so on. They create Arena Football 1. So they're actually going to have, every week of the season, I'm not sure how long their season is, Sunday nights in the arena on Vice. So to me, it just seems like a perfect fit again for pro wrestling. Obviously, MLW had it for a short amount of time. Not to great effect in terms of that syndicated special. Special that they had with Hammerstone and Fatu. But I believe that they still air WoW Wrestling like late nights. But to me, the thing that would make the most sense would be New Japan specials on Vice.
What about TNA wrestling? What is going on? What is up with TNA lately?
So, everyone was looking on with curiosity or morbid curiosity when they booked the Belmont UBS Arena. And their first week was off to a good start. And now the show's in July. So it's going to be like, how do things move along week to week? Selling 64 more tickets the following week. Is that good or bad? I don't know. It's too early, so it's obviously not a huge number to move it forward. And they'd want to average more than that to begin, hopefully getting close to their modest setup of 4,000. So then we were sort of getting curious with sort of talent. Are they going to let most of the name talent go? What's going to happen? So AJ Francis was announced as re-signing with TNA at the beginning of the year, or just at New Year. Exactly. And then, of course, Carlos Silva, who's we've been talking about for a number of weeks, taking over, TNA operations and so on, that when it was shared, their deal with Sportsnet Canada by Ariel Schnerer, Carlos Silva said more to come for TNA Wrestling in 25. Did he mean New England Sports Network? I don't know, but it made us all curious. So what's their upcoming shows look like? In Garland, Texas for the double shot, San Antonio at the end of January, El Paso in March. So I don't know, is there going to be enough tapings there or something's going to be filled in February? Then St. Joseph, Missouri in the end of March, LA on April 27th. And as we talked about, the Slammiversary show in July.
What is going on in the world of New Japan Pro Wrestling? What's going on with the Battle in the Valley?
So Battle in the Valley, 52 ticket piece since 4 days ago, at least as of when WrestleTix had tracked it. But 1,151 tickets out. Current setup of 2,143, so just under 1,000 tickets remaining. We tend to see with New Japan shows a velocity of tickets being distributed essentially, or coming off the map, or being sold as it gets closer to the show. So that's something to watch out for. And then it's to look closely at the pictures and the WrestleTix report in terms of like, what is that final number? And interestingly, with Triller, they're highlighting their 10-year anniversary of delivering live streaming with New Japan, the Wrestle Kingdom 19 and Wrestle Dynasty shows. So we have seen a shift from New Japan World being pushed as much from New Japan, and Triller not necessarily taking it over, but like some of those big events coming to Triller. I'm not sure if you have New Japan World, if you can get those shows anyway. It's really interesting that it had held at about 100,000 viewers, but we haven't heard updates about New Japan World subscribers in years. So that's an interesting one. But from the press release, It said that their first show was 10 years ago, and it was when they were known as Fight.tv. But I think that was when they were known as Flips. Of course, Jeff Jarrett helping to broker that deal at the time.
What's up with GCW, the People versus GCW, the big Hammerstein show? Are we getting any closer to a possible sellout?
Yeah, so certainly when you're in a smaller venue and you move the same amount of tickets per week as the TNA show in Belmont, it's more impactful. But 69 tickets moved in the last 7 days when there were 17 days left till the show. So this was actually just from a day or two ago. 930 tickets distributed. They brought it down from 2,200 to 1,500. They could easily increase that, but to me, it looks like unless it picks up a lot more, if there ends up being a main event draw or some special attraction, but time is slipping away, that you probably have to close off the second balcony fully, and for the few people that bought those tickets, like upgrade them to the second balcony or even to the first balcony, sorry, or even the floor. Sorry, I sound like that joke, like who's on first. And then with other GCW shows, so they announced a series of upcoming shows, pretty much same old, same old. I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean like that they're consistently returning to markets, but a number of these markets weren't popping, but it just seems like a challenging environment overall. But you go consistently with what you know, and especially when you need to deliver 75 shows, and then you could add in some new things here and there. I saw Brett was asking if people have any venue suggestions, not in so many words, or connections in Pittsburgh. So Friday, January 31st, Indianapolis, Fountain Square Theater. February 28th, San Diego, Primal Confound. Back to the UCC, March 1st. March 2nd, the Now Theater in Phoenix. And then back to Atlantic City, the Showboat, March 15th and 16th. July 11th in Gillies in Dallas. Actually, I didn't grab that image. It looked like they already had another set of Atlantic City shows on the map. I thought they'd be like a little bit calmer about that because it had been struggling. But just looking at their overall schedule, January 10th, Rochester, the 11th, Columbus, New York on the 19th, France and London, 25th and 26th, Indianapolis on the 31st, Jersey J Cup, February 15th and 16th, National City, California on February 28th, LA on March 1st, Mesa, Arizona on March 2nd. We talked about Atlantic City, and then Dallas in July. And interestingly, in Vegas, right, for WrestleMania weekend, they will be working with, I believe, WrestleCon. Those sort of shows were separate from one another, the experiences, but the WrestleCon Memorial Show will be under the collective auspices. So it's interesting to see them working together.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Kind of an odd thing there. But what is going on with MLW? I see that eventually we'll be heading back to center stage in Atlanta.
Yeah, so firstly, Dallas, it looks like they're doing really well there in terms of what's been put for sale. It wasn't necessarily like a full map use, but when I last looked, and these might be even gone, the second row, there was just two on the ring side. There was just one additional reserve seating, and then there was GA available. But center stage is becoming like the mecca in Ridgefield Park, New Jersey, with the way it's just one of those venues now that everyone is using. We've seen the Heels Have Eyes, TNA, GCW, NXT just announced a show I put the wrong date in my notes, but a show at the end of January, so ahead of this show. But MLW is running center stage as well, a venue that's been pretty good for them in the past. So a little bit more than a month remaining, but 247 tickets distributed of a setup of 772. What else? And then Commerce, California, and then Cicero in Illinois, later this year.
As far as ROW is concerned, reality of wrestling, very interesting. Zilla Fatu, the son of Umaga versus Booker T. Is that in the workings here? Is that planned?
Yeah, so January 11th, I actually have a screen grab of this venue, their Walker, Texas arena, Walker Lawyer, Texas arena, something like that. There's just like a dotting of seats remaining. So I haven't followed so much the storyline online or how this came about, but Booker T had a line that he's gonna spank him like a baby or something like that. And I was thinking, like, you don't spank a baby, but but not in so many words. But like, okay, so I was already like amateur booking this, John. I was like, let's say you have the match, it's hot 50. I don't know how long you can keep Zilla in the ring. It's basically his second year now he's in. So however many minutes, and Booker, obviously is mostly retired. However minutes, maybe just a few minutes, and then you have like a schmoz finish. You have a couple surprise Bloodline members that just like decimate Booker T. And then you have Queen Sharmell come out like, all upset, and she throws herself over Booker T. And inadvertently, one of the Bloodline members, probably Zilla would be a good idea, injures her. And then you could build up to something like a little bit bigger, like I think they're in Houston, somewhere like maybe like a theater venue or maybe like a few thousand seat venue where you can like try and pop a house in March or April. So a little like Memphis style booking there.
Look at you putting on the Booker hat. I love it. Now,
well, I know I'm trying to utilize your connection to Vince Russo, John, so we can.
Yes, there you go. There you go. Nice, smart. Now, as far as some here and there, I know that's your favorite topic, which is a bunch of random stuff. The ACW show, that interests me, the Poughkeepsie, because I didn't know how well the tickets were selling, but it seems like they're killing it now.
Yeah, Poughkeepsie loves their mainstream name pro wrestling, and they're not being served. And Northeast Wrestling was killing it for a number of years there. And that got quiet, a little bit of struggles, maybe with AEW taking a lot of the talent off the board and so on. But they're coming back, sort of like with Nick Nemeth, Matt Riddle, Tommy Dreamer, the type of people you would expect on a show in the Mid Hudson Civic Center. And 1,371 tickets distributed, 543 in the last 7 days. As of we're recording this, we're just a day out. So really curious about this number. Of course, bringing in Nemeth and Riddle and so on, and booking fees and hotels or whatever, it's not cheap, but it just seems like a success. Just quickly, some other here and there's. Enjoy Wrestling reported they had a heck of a year, held 7 events, attended by a total more than 5,000 people. We're in the biggest music venue in Pittsburgh and filled the thing. Crowned new champs and said goodbye to others. New Texas Pro, we broke records last night. Lone Star 5 was an incredible night from top to bottom. We can now officially say that last night's show was our highest attended event and largest gate in New Texas Pro history. Maple Leaf Wrestling was making a little bit noise that 2025 will be bigger and so on. So I'm not going to read the whole press release, but really curious about that, talking about their full national ambitions from sea to sea. But not all bright news for independent wrestling, or maybe they're retiring for a good reason, but KSPW, the 25-year-old promotion in Pittsburgh, is going away.
Nice. All right. Great stuff, Lavie. Thank you to Leela. Now let's hit the plugs. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. What about you, Lavie? Where can everybody find you?
Follow me on X, Lavie Marg, LAVIE-MARG. Check out my long-form articles on LionCubJobSearch.com. Check out our LinkedIn group, The Business of the Business. We are the official business podcast of PW Ponderings, and we are distributed by the Creative Control Network.
All right. Thank you, Lavie. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. See you right back here and next week for a little business of the business. We'll see you next week, folks.